Today in Matt's class, we are hanging out with Kristen Rose Merlo, and we are gonna go head to head showing you guys how to do an awesome landscape painting in acrylic. And I'm actually excited about this, also nervous because Kristen is really, really good.
He's gonna buy me dinner.
And this is, yeah, I'm probably gonna have to.
He's totally gonna lose this.
You guys are gonna get some great tips from me, and I know you're gonna get great tips from Kristen. So I'm not wearing the Bob Ross wig today, but this is gonna be an awesome, awesome episode. Stick around. So real quick, I wanted to share with you guys a couple demos that I've done with this technique in the past, and I want to show you how the landscape technique works and what's so great about it. So this is one of the demos right here, and this is like the Avatar Mountains in China, and this is one of the locations that you'll see in one of the Aladdin 3477 movies. This was kind of a production painting when I was really trying to figure out what the style and the settings were going to be. In particular, what I like about this is this really shows depth. It really feels like these mountains, these crazy structures here, are a lot closer, and it looks like these structures are way, way back in the distance. There's really good depth happening, and I'm going to share with you guys the secret to painting awesome depth. And that's kind of the name of the game when it comes to doing these landscape paintings. This is an early production painting. This is when Fiji looked like this. This is now the UBA robot that's in the movie. But at one point that was the look. I didn't know exactly what Aladdin was gonna look like yet. I didn't have the Jinn symbol figured out, but this is a scene from the first movie. Again, there's a lot of depth here where some of these trees feel like they're a lot closer. Some of them feel like they are farther away. You guys are gonna learn the secret. This is back before the Taj Mahal was kind of this giant pike in the sky. Instead, originally, I was gonna have the Taj Mahal go across like this, but I feel like design-wise, it just didn't work as well. But this is the landscape technique where this stuff here definitely feels like it's closer. This looks like it is farther away. Here is yet another Taj Mahal flying in the sky. This has the total look, but again, there's just super, super depth, so that this area down here definitely feels like it's a lot closer, and you can kind of see these areas going back into the distance. And if this looks kind of familiar to you, it's because this is a little bit closer to what Fiji looks like. This is the landscape process. This is kind of, again, this is like a heavily wooded area, and there's parts of the forest that look like it's further back into the mist, and then there's areas where the trees are a lot closer to us. Last but not least, here is a majestic scene, another production painting for Aladdin, but this is based on photo reference where I really like the look of the mountains. Are you guys ready? Are you ready to paint? What are we waiting for? Come on, let's go! So here's what's up. First things last, before we even begin painting, we are gonna work with what is called a wet palette. So in order to achieve that, what I use one of these, it's called a butcher tray. It's really just a porcelain, it's a porcelain tray. We're working with acrylic paint, and acrylics dry really quick, but if you use a wet palette, there's a way that you can keep them damp without actually diluting your acrylics into a wash. So what we're gonna do, we are gonna take paper towels, we are going to wet them. This is like a jug that's like cut off, this gallon here, and there's just water in here. We're gonna take paper towels, we're gonna get them wet, and we are going to place them in our porcelain tray. Normally our porcelain tray is really clean. Mine has all kinds of paint in it. It works just the same. First things last, Kristen, here we go. We are going to, oh, you're already ready.
Oh, I got myself set up.
Oh, geez, I have to catch up. I'm going to take my paper towels. I am going to wet them, and I am going to place my paper towels. You want to get it nice and cushiony, so when you're mixing your paints, it has a little bit of a bounce to it. It's kind of nice. Some people like a hard surface that they're mixing on, but having a little bit of cushion helps. That'll also help keep it wet. It'll kind of retain if it's got a nice sponge to work with. Once we've got our paper towel down here, we can't just mix our paints on the paper towel, because that's going to make the paper towel rip and come up, and it's going to get all gooey in your paint. So what you can do you need a sheet of tracing paper. Tracing paper is magic. Not only do you use it for tracing, there's this magic quality that tracing paper has that normal paper does not have, and that is it's water resistant. And what's great about it is if we put it down here like so, it can keep your paints damp, but water isn't actually seeping through the tracing paper. If you use normal paper, it's almost like, this is kind of gross to describe it this way, but it's almost like toilet paper where it'll absorb and then it'll just start ripping apart. Tracing paper is magic because it stays strong, it stays damp, it'll keep your paints from drying too quick, but water isn't going to seep up through it, which is awesome. All right, we've got our wet palette ready to go. Now we're gonna put down some paint. So what I like to do, I like to put down some black. I'm gonna use a little bit of black. I like to put down some white. I'm gonna use quite a bit of that. And then I like to make a rainbow of colors that I'm gonna use to mix all of my colors. So here we go. A little bit of black, a little bit of white, perhaps a lot of bit of white. Now I'm going to start going through, and I like to, for some reason, I don't know why, I just always start with yellow. It doesn't really matter. And it doesn't really matter the order that you put your colors in, but I just like to go in a rainbow for some reason. I don't know why. And you can always squeeze out more paint. I'm usually a little bit frugal with my paint because a penny saved is a penny earned. So to move around the rainbow, I've got my yeller, I've got my orange, which is usually cadmium red light. I've got my cadmium red medium, which is like a nice candy apple red. Next up, we are gonna move into dioxazine purple.
Fun little fact, purple is one of the few colors that is very hard to mix by hand. So if you're saving money, would recommend still picking up the purple that you're looking for.
A lot of people would say that about green too. Orange is actually pretty easy to mix, but green, I have a hard time mixing green. Then purple goes into bleu, ultramarine blue, phthalo blue. I'm gonna use the permanent blue light next. And then that is gonna transition into green, vivid lime green. Let's have some fun with that. And then also I've got yellow ochre right here, burnt sienna, and then raw umber. All right, rock and roll. The first rule that you have a lot of times with landscape painting, I have two major rules that I follow. Rule number one is you want to paint from the background to the foreground. And part of that is because it's the whole name of the game is depth, and especially for a landscape painting, it's all about overlapping. So you want to start from the furthest thing away and then move closer and closer.
Yes. Definitely. Even with mine, I tend to start there. Can you imagine trying to paint all those trees and then trying to put in the sky? You'd drive yourself crazy.
The furthest thing away is the sky, and then we've got clouds on top. I've got really hazy clouds. Now, 99.999 times out of 100, your sky is going to be darker at the top, and then it always gets lighter towards the horizon. It doesn't even matter where the sun is. You go outside, even at nighttime, you look straight up in the air, look at the sky, look at how dark it is, and then look at the horizon, and you will see it's definitely lighter towards the horizon. With this technique, unlike a lot of other techniques, normally you're drawing out your painting, and then you're painting on top, kind of keeping the drawing in check and following that drawing. That way you can erase and kind of fix things as you go. The great thing about painting a landscape painting, you don't have to draw anything. You can just go in and start painting. And it's wonderful because if you enjoy painting, you can just, you don't even have to draw any, you don't have to like figure things out or perspective. You can lose yourself in enjoying your painting, enjoying the painting process. The idea is if you accidentally paint a tree too big, no one's gonna look at that and say, oh yeah, right, as if they have trees that big, good job. No one's gonna say that. Or if you paint a mountain maybe a little bit too small, or maybe on the side you accidentally went up like this a little bit, no one's gonna say, yeah, mountains don't do that. They never go up like that in an angle like that. No one's gonna know. So that's kind of the beauty of it, is you can just paint, have fun with it, and it's organic. I'm gonna start painting in my sky a little bit darker at the top, not much darker. In this case, it's not a very dark sky, but it's gonna be a little bit darker, going a little bit lighter as it comes down like so. I'm trying to mix a nice sky color for the top here, and I started way too dark. I got a little bit too much phthalo blue in there. So now I have to fight it, and I have to keep adding white in there to kind of pull it back where I want it to be. This is maybe a good one to start with, and then I'm going to keep getting lighter. Now, what I'm going to do for this transition, I want my sky to be relatively smooth, and acrylic, once it dries, it's hard to mix a nice smooth transition. So what I'm going to do for this sky, I'm going to do what's called working wet into wet. So what that means, I'm going to get some white ready right here to make sure I don't shoot myself in the foot. And I'm going to take some of this blue towards the top. I'm going to go ahead and I am going to put it down nice and healthy, because I don't want acrylic dries super quick. I don't want this to dry on me too quick, because once I have this down, okay, here we go, working wet into wet. I'm taking white, I'm mixing it in here as I go. See how now it's a little bit lighter? And while this is still wet, I'm working wet into wet. I'm kind of getting a nice, I'm just grazing my brush across because it's still wet. I'm able to kind of get a nice transition. It's just getting a little, you might not even notice how much that is. Now it's getting pretty, it's starting to get pretty dry. All right, now I'm going to mix a little bit more white. I'm going to go a little bit further down. It's a little bit lighter now, and here we go, wet into wet before it dries.
And the more you idly just keep swiping your brush back and forth when it's dry, the more you're going to cause that paint to dry. So like as soon as you got it blended, if you notice that your brush is dry, reload it. Don't just keep going idly.
Another thing that I like to do when I have a sky, and usually you'll notice this in your photo anyway, depending on the sky and how the clouds are going in perspective, almost always clouds are moving across the sky. So whenever I'm doing a gradation, almost always I'm going across like this. That way, if there is any streaking happening in the clouds, if I have any accidental brush strokes that I didn't really want there, it's okay. Like right now, I kind of see this as kind of a dramatic, so hopefully I can blend this pretty good.
I'm kind of doing it on purpose. I'm leaving the streakies.
But if I go across like this, if I see any streaks, you know what? It almost looks like clouds in the sky a little bit, or it looks like haze, or it almost looks like wind. It's like the sky is a little bit windswept. But if I go up and down, it's almost gonna look like it's raining, or just something is a little bit off about the sky. So doing those motions going across is gonna help. The same is true a lot of times when you're painting water, like a pond or a lake. Having those brush strokes go across is usually going to help you quite a bit. You know, I hate to do it because I feel like I've got a really nice gradation for the sky, but because it's in the photo, I'm going to add a little bit of these hazy clouds. So instead of going because that doesn't really look absolute white, if I start adding in absolute white with the clouds, it's just going to blast out. It's going to be cartoony. So I've got this really light blue kind of color, and I don't want to have a lot of globby paint in there. I want to try to make it a little bit hazy so that I can just kind of graze across for my cloudy areas and just kind of paint what I see. It's not against the law to use your finger, and again, acrylic paint is non-toxic, so it's not going to hurt you if you touch it. I gave you the first rule, and the first rule is to start with the background, and then you keep moving. What's closer than that? What's closer than that? You're stacking things up. So the sky was the furthest thing away, then the clouds. What's the next farthest thing away? Well, for me, it's going to be these mountains way in the background here. Here is the second trick to landscape painting. Trick number 2 is you are always working, for each one of these elements, you are working from dark to light. Now, here's where the depth is really going to help you. When you're doing landscape painting, you're doing one element at a time. So we did the sky until the sky is done. Then we did the clouds until the clouds were done. The next thing I'm going to paint is this range of mountains back here until that range of mountains is done. Then we're going to paint the next element, which is kind of these mountains right here, until they're done. Then we're going to do this part of the mountains until that's done. Then this is a little bit closer here. That'll probably be the last of it. Now here's the trick. We're working from dark to light. So what that means, when I paint this mountain range, I'm painting the entire area of those mountains. I'm going to start with the darkest color, and then I'm going to get lighter and lighter as I go. Then when I paint these, I'm starting with the darkest color and then lighter as I go. Here's what you need to look out for. Objects that are further away, there's a lot more haze in the air, and our eyes just start missing color a little bit. We can't see things as clearly and as vivid as things that are closer to us. So objects that are in the background are going to have less contrast and less vibrant color than objects that are closer. So as an example, if you look at these mountains way far away, I don't see absolute black, I don't see absolute white, and I don't see very bright colors. But as things get closer to us, I see areas of absolute black, areas of absolute white, and I see a lot more vivid color. That is the secret to how we see beautiful landscapes. So if you look at any of my samples here, if I can show you really quick, if you look at this, this really has cool depth because the mountain's really far away, doesn't have a lot of black or any black, it doesn't have any white, it's not really bright, vibrant colors, but as these mountains get closer and closer to us, we see a lot more contrast with darkest darks. We also see a lot more color closer to us than we do anything in the background. The vibrant colors are actually only in the front. All of these other colors are really kind of diluted. This is like a grayish green, and it's not really, it doesn't really have darkest darks, and it doesn't have brightest brights. But as they get closer and closer, you can see these mountains have a little bit more contrast than these right here, but still it's kind of pushed back. And as you get closer, now this has a little bit more contrast between darks and lights and just a pinch more color. And then finally, when we get closer here, we've got those nice juicy darks, and we also have that vivid color. You'll notice the same is true here with Fiji. The areas that are knocked back in the distance, you will see less color and less contrast. And as you get closer, look at like this foliage down here, you see a lot more darks and you see a lot more color. The darkest color here, which is like, gosh, it's almost like a bluish, maybe kind of purplish color, but I'm gonna start with whatever that darkest color is, and I'm gonna paint the entire mountain range, that color slightly getting lighter each time. All right, here we go. I'm trying to help push that back. A lot of times I will hold, and you know what, like this looks like it's really light here, but when I hold it there, it's actually, this is darker than this is right here, so I need to go a little bit lighter, even though it's my darkest dark. The more you can push those values so that things farther away have less value and they're more grayed out, that'll make it so that the areas that are closer are more vivid and just, you'll really push that depth. Again, one of the secrets of this is you want to have some nice overlapping. So I don't have to paint all of this behind here, but I definitely want to go past that little area. The difference between this technique and the mixed media technique, I really love the mixed media technique for illustration where I'm illustrating people's faces or anything that's kind of like a pop culture kind of thing, that larger than life look. One of the things I like about it is you start off with a drawing that looks great, and every step of the way it just looks better and better and better. As much as I love the landscape technique, this is a technique where at first it doesn't look that great and you're like, oh man, how am I going to pull this together? It does not look good. And a lot of times it isn't until the very end where you're like, man, this is really coming together. This looks great. Another thing about this technique, you're working opaquely. So what that means, unlike when we did the mixed media technique, we had a lot of transparent color where we were mixing water. For this technique, we are using paint straight out of the tube. The idea is we can continue to overlap. When I painted this gray, none of the sky is showing through. This gray is absolutely covering this part of the sky. That is really going to help us as we continue to build forward. So one of the things you need to be careful of when you're mixing your brush, or if you're getting water, or you're using water, obviously, water soluble, to get the paint out of your brush, now you've got water in your brush. So if you go to mix, you're actually creating a little bit of wash. So you want to be careful with that. One of the things I do a lot of times when I'm painting, I will rarely wash out my brushes. I would rather mix into a new color, and you start getting what's called local color anyway. It starts working in your favor. But the last thing I want to do is get a bunch of water in my brush while I'm doing this technique, because it's going to start making washes, and then I'm going to start seeing through what I'm painting, and I don't want that. I want to work with opaque paint. So now that I've got, like, this gray has dried here, I've got this slightly lighter, kind of grayish color here that I'm working with. And now anywhere that I see that's a little bit lighter, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna start painting in these edges. Because they're chunky mountains, I'm getting a little bit more graphic with my shapes. I'm probably gonna do one more layer on this, but you can see already how it almost looks like these mountains in the distance. It's not too much detail, but it almost looks like there's patches of light just kind of showing these little facades in the rocks. I want this to dry because before I add in the next layer, I don't want the color to mix with the color underneath. So I want to let this dry and then add in lighter and lighter, building and building and building. And I don't want to move to any of these other areas until I finish these mountains in the distance. So you're moving from element to element to element, moving your way closer and closer to the foreground. So I can't do any of this other stuff until I finish this element of the mountains here before I move on to the next area of mountains that are a little bit closer. I've got my third layer on here. So again, these are mountains way in the distance. So they're just knocked back quite a bit. So now I'm gonna get a little bit closer. Now these mountains are a little bit closer and it seems like the darkest area is black, right? Wrong. If you compare the darkness there to say the darkness here, this is way darker than this is. Now, just the same, I can tell that this is a digital photo, and one of the things that they did either in Photoshop or in Lightroom, they really pushed the contrast digitally. Now, that makes sometimes a stronger photo, but what it accidentally does, it gets rid of a lot of the depth. So here, these look like they're far away, and then boom, everything else looks like it's closer, when really, that should be the next furthest thing, and then this is a little bit closer, then this should really have the most contrast. So I'm gonna push that a little bit, and I'm gonna have my darkest dark that I start with. This is clearly lighter than this is, but I'm gonna push that a little bit, just go even lighter. It'll definitely be darker than this area, but here we go, darkest darks. I am going to add in this mountain range right here, and it's just a little bit higher. And there is the darkest area. So everything from here on out, I'm gonna get lighter and lighter. This is clearly closer than this is, but I'm just gonna get lighter and lighter with all of these facets as these mountains come closer and closer to us.
Acrylic is awesome because it is a great thing to like do for a couple hours and then walk away and then not touch it for an hour, come back to it later. The paint goes on just fine over dry paint.
All right, so I've got this next layer down. I'm getting lighter and lighter, but already you can kind of see it almost looks like little facets. It's one step closer. These mountains, I can kind of tell where the light is hitting them. It's a little bit more warm sunlight, so I actually mixed in just a pinch of yellow to get a little bit closer to that sandy color, and it's just a little bit lighter. It's not a lot brighter, just a little bit. So I'm gonna hit some of those areas. Now I don't want to just cover all of those areas. I really want to look for where the light is, and then where the light isn't, I want to just let it go back into shadow. So there's certain areas that get lighter, and then there's certain areas that don't, and I want to kind of make sure I have some separation there. So now I'm adding the fourth color here, and this will probably be the last one. I'm just putting the brightest brights to really let some of these highlights pop, and this is what's going to help make this look even more rocky. So the areas that are further back, just by nature, you're going to see less layers, and as things get closer, they get more colorful, that gets more contrast, and you're just going to have a lot more layers moving from dark to light. So the areas in the background are probably going to go a lot quicker, and the areas in the foreground are probably going to take a little bit more time to get in that juicy detail. So you can see this area is a little bit darker as I'm getting a little bit closer here. This part of the mountains kind of exceed a little bit taller into the sky. Oh, this is like a really interesting kind of range of mountains here. This is gonna go, so I'm just gonna get this whole thing in.
Only difference between a burnt color and a raw color is just the amount of reds that it moves towards. Raw is going to be a little on the cool side. Burnt is on the warm side.
All right, so I'm at the point where this last area is kind of a combo of this kind of mountain that's here and this area here. This is the closest area to us. So the darkest dark is actually black. So I'm gonna paint all of this in with absolute black, and you can see already how these areas are getting closer and closer to us. This is gonna add even more depth, and it's really gonna kind of seal the deal. This is also gonna have the most detail, and it's also gonna have the most contrast, and it's also gonna be the most colorful, but it's really gonna bring it forward, and I can't wait to bring it forward. Even though there's these little areas of trees, again, I have to start no matter what, even if it doesn't have absolute black, this whole area in the foreground, everything starts with the darkest color. In this case, it's absolute black. So I'm going ahead and I'm adding any of these little foliage areas that kind of exceed the edge of this. I'm putting them in. Right, you can see how already, without even painting any of the areas lighter, can't you feel the depth? It's still a little cartoony because I don't have any of these details in there, but definitely this area looks like it's way closer than this. This area looks like it's way closer than this. This area looks like it's way closer than this. This is because I followed the two rules. One, I started from the background, I'm moving to the foreground. Rule number two, I'm going from dark to light for each one of these areas. I had the darkest area first, building lighter and lighter, and then this is kind of rule number three, but the idea again with depth, you only want the areas in the foreground to have the most contrast, so that's where I'm using absolute black, but the areas way in the distance, this was the darkest dark, and you look and it's really not that dark, and comparatively this wasn't that dark either, that little area right there. And as the areas get closer and closer, the darkest dark I'm starting with gets a little bit darker each time until I get to the end and my darkest dark is absolute black. From here on out, it's just painting the colors lighter and lighter each step of the way. Now, in a situation like this, I also have the foliage. I've got these trees and all the leaves. So here's the catch. A lot of people might say, well, what do you paint first, the leaves or do you paint the rocks? Because the leaves and the trees are on top of the rock, they grow out of the rock, I'm going to want to paint the rock first. Then I'm going to want to paint any leaves or foliage on top of that. Again, it's this idea, it's almost helping to make it 3D. What's farther in the background? Well, there's the rock first and then the foliage is on top of that in front. So I'm going to paint the rocks first. Speaking of, let's rock.
And now the fun part.
Almost done with the rocky structures, and then I'm going to add foliage.
Leaf highlights.
I'm starting to add little areas of foliage. I'm looking, there's some areas here that have like these orange leaves, a little bit oranger. So this isn't orange straight out of the tube. I've diluted this a little bit, so it's not super orangey, bright orange. But now I'm going to go through and anywhere that I see just a little bit of those orange leaves, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of add those little points of interest. A little bit, and that's really going to help just add some really cool detail you know, even though I'm painting what's in the photo and trying to pay attention to that, I'm still utilizing things that I know, like working random because it's organic. So I want to make sure whatever I am painting, none of it's too matchy-matchy, none of it's too like, there's an order to it and it looks too robotic. I need to make sure that there are areas where there's a lot of these colors or tones closer together, and then some of them are further apart, and some of the areas don't have any. So I don't want to sprinkle perfect areas of these orange everywhere. I want to look at where it is in the photo, but I want to make sure that I'm trying to make these areas as random as possible, so when someone looks at it, it isn't orange perfectly sprinkled everywhere. I want to try to make it look as random as possible.
So I'm doing basically the exact same thing Matt is doing, only with dabs and little leaf shapes. I want to make sure that anything in the foreground is like way brighter and more contrasty.
I'm just hitting some of these orange areas where it's a little bit brighter and just adding in some selective areas like that. It's just making a little bit more 3D, kind of helping round these out wherever I see them. I'm not adding it to everywhere I have orange, only where I see it. As human beings, we're always looking for the order. We're always trying to fix things. So the more random you can make it, and people can't, you know, they don't realize they're doing this, but when they can't see anything to fix, they kind of just see the painting for what it is. I haven't used the water once with these brushes because I don't want to dilute and make washes. So I'm kind of using areas of my palette to just kind of smear off the paint, and then I just go right in and mix. And if some of that color mixes in, that's kind of helping to make my my colors a little bit more uniform anyway. I mean, I don't want to clog my brushes and have them dry with the paint in there, but by not using the water as much, it's helping have just perfectly opaque color. Now, anywhere that I see green at all, even if it's just a darker green, even if I know it's going to go lighter, it doesn't matter. I'm hitting it first with this darker green, and then I'm going to go lighter and lighter as I move along. I'm looking at what's there, but I know that the light is coming down this way, so I'm going to be painting more on the tops of the leaves as the shadows kind of tuck underneath. It's looking awesome. The whole patchy area, like all of that looks so cool.
It's taken a minute. Getting some silhouette of tree going on.
You can see my leaves are getting lighter and lighter, and it's not quite there yet. I need to get even brighter highlights for some of these leaves, but each step of the way, you can see that foliage on this mountain is really starting to stand out a little bit more three-dimensional. So I don't want to add this lighter green everywhere, only in the places that I actually see it. So I'm being really selective. There's a couple areas here where it's got the brighter greens, but I've got a greenery here, but I don't see any areas where it's really, really bright green. So as much as I would love to just add bright green everywhere there too, you know what? I need to pull back. Otherwise, it's just gonna be a cartoon. It's gonna be too perfect, bright green everywhere. Looking good. All right, I think I am almost done. What about you?
I'm thinking we're looking pretty okay.
Man, I could keep going on this, but
oh, I can easily keep going on this, but I need to like...
So you're building up kind of three-dimensionally. So if this kind of looks like a three-dimensional painting, I mean, the technique that you're doing, it's light on top of shadow. So yeah, I mean, in a weird way, it is kind of three-dimensional for real. Oh, I'm jelly with those colors. That is so cool. It's just an awesome palette of color, but also the depth. You really pushed not having as bright colors in the background, and then as you get closer and closer, obviously more contrast from dark to light, also more color, and that looks It looks great. Did you enjoy class today? If so, give me a like. If there's something you'd like to see me cover in a future video, let me know what that is in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. I've also got a video series called Sketchbook Challenge that helps your drawing, creativity, and fill up an awesome looking sketchbook. Plus, there are videos on You Can Draw Star Wars, Hollywood is Dead, and sneak peeks at the Aladdin 3477 motion picture trilogy. In order to not miss any new videos, hit that notification bell. Sharing is caring, and it's great to inspire your friends. Share this video on social media and your friends will share awesome art tips they find with you. If you're on Instagram, you can follow me at Matt_Busch_Instagram. I'll see you back in the classroom soon. Don't be tardy.